Number 10. Mummification. Back in the ancient Egyptian times, of course, mummification was common. And even today we're finding more mummies. It's pretty exciting. We're uncovering more ancient history every day. But how the hell was mummification done? Obviously we can't talk about this in school because we're a little too young and maybe it's a little frightening. So warning, it's a little gross. We've talked about teeth worms and trepanation, so I don't know. I feel like you're prepared. Well, for starters, mummification wasn't cheap. Being mummified was reserved for the rich. Now, it's pretty brutal, but what you would do is you would put a hook in your nose and then you would pull out your brains. All of the brains and the mushy stuff, just right out of your head. And then you would cut the left side of the stomach open, remove all of those goods, all those organs, gone, easy. And then while those are drying, you would put the lungs and the liver in jars. So ancient Egyptians, that's why they needed a lot of jars. You gotta put lungs and organs in it. And then you put the heart back in the body and then wash the insides out with wine and spices, all that good stuff. And then you would cover the body in salt for 70 days. Now around day 40, you would stuff in some sand, and then come day 70, that's when you would wrap them finally in the mummy bandages. And then the sarcophagus finally awaits. Those jars of organs were also stored in the burial chamber. So if you watch The Mummy and they're, making somebody a mummy and they're like moving around, no, it wasn't like that at all. It took 70 days. It was a long, exhausting process. Number 9, first open heart surgery. Okay, going back to ancient Egyptians, why not? We're on a little track here. So they would clean the entire body out and then they would put the heart back in. Now, of course, they weren't alive during any of this, obviously. But when was the first ever open heart surgery? When did the impossible become a reality after this? Well, the first successful open heart surgery after mummification went down in Chicago in 1893. The patient was a man named James Cornish. He got a knife wound to the chest during a brawl. The surgeon, Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, who by the way used to be a shoemaker's assistant, he saved this man. This is how he did it. In the city's first interracial hospital too, might I add, there weren't many textbooks on this type of operations at the time, so the odds of survival here were low. In fact, there weren't any odds at all, being the first. At this point in time, there were no x-rays, no antibiotics, no anesthesia, and also no problem. Apparently, using just a scalpel, Dr. Williams cut through his chest, weaved through nerves, muscles, ribs, you name it, until eventually he closed a severed artery near the heart. Now, Cornish survived, and come 1894, Williams was promoted, obviously, to chief surgeon at the Freedmen's Hospital in Washington, D.C. Yeah, I didn't remember hearing those details in school. Probably would have fainted at my desk. Number 8, Bridget Bishop. Okay, getting some witchy nonsense for this one. Back in 1692, 500 people lost their lives due to smallpox. This happened after Europeans brought the disease to North America, and in result, you would get covered in these sores, these pimple-like bubbles. It was really uncomfortable. So rather than recognize the situation as symptoms from a disease, the people of Salem at first thought, oh, they're probably cursed, they're probably witches, hence why they're acting odd. The small Massachusetts village began this wave of hysteria with 2 young women, Betty Paris and Abigail Williams. They started to show signs of the disease. They were convulsing, acting strange, talking nonsense. Obviously, they were extremely ill. And so the village doctor, William Greggs, just said, I think they're bewitched. I think there's a couple of witches in our presence. And then other villagers slowly started to show similar symptoms because, science, that's how it works. But at the time, they believed Bridget was the first ever witch, and she was just cursing everybody around her. It was kind of the reason they kicked off the entire Salem witch hunt. It was all because of Bridget Bishop. Over the next few months, around 150 more folks were all convicted, all meeting their similar fate on Gallows Hill. Maybe it was Bridget Bishop, or maybe it was just Rye disease. It's now referred to as St. Anthony's fire. You convulse, you experience delusions. Feels like bugs are under your skin. It's horrible. But these doctors didn't know that back then. Everybody just thought they were all cursed, that they were witches. No, they were not cursed. They just needed help. Oddly enough, in May 1693, just 1 year later, the Salem witch trials abruptly stopped. Did the town of Salem run out of witches, or did they run out of contaminated rye bread? I vote the latter. I vote the latter, me personally. Number 7, Malin Mat's daughter. Okay, sometimes in history, humans can be found guilty of practicing witchcraft. This is wild. This was like, Imagine that today. I've mentioned Giles Corey on this list before. He's a brave soul, but we also have to mention Malin Mat's daughter. She doesn't get the light as much as Giles does. It's one thing for a town to turn against you and call you a witch, but imagine family. That's exactly what happened to Malin Mat's daughter. She was a Swedish widow, and her own daughter told everybody that she was a witch. She was the last victim of the Great Swedish Witch Hunt in 1676, also known as the Great Noise. Malin goes down in history because 1, it was thankfully one of the last. But 2, she never admitted. Yeah, she didn't cry out in pain. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She said all this witchy nonsense was hogwash, and she stood by it too. What an OG. She was a champ. She was a badass. Her daughter was actually later found guilty of perjury, so later she met a similar fate. You know what I'm saying? What goes around, comes around. Like a witch flying on a broom in circles. Number 6, wedding season. Okay, we'll brighten the mood up a little bit. We'll start going this way in ancient history. Maybe you fantasized about your own big day, right? Maybe it's a beach wedding. Maybe it's a themed wedding, like a winter wonderland. Maybe it's a nice ice palace. It's always fun, I guess. I'm Canadian, so I'm like, no, definitely, but I hear ya. It's your big day, okay? Get creative. They say the best month to get married is June. And again, from a Canadian point of view, I can absolutely agree. In ancient Roman times, however, getting married in June was a must. See, June was the month of the god Juno, and they protect women and life when it comes to marriage and childbirth. So if it's between that and Halloween, obviously we're gonna go with June, right? Better omens over here for sure. Another myth is that bathing was rarely done back then. So when majority of the population washed up at the end of May or the beginning of June, everybody smelt nice, right? Everyone felt good and they wanted to celebrate. So why not have weddings in this month as well, right after we have a little bubble bath or two. That's a myth, but I can also see it checking out. It does make sense. A June wedding in ancient Roman days was also done so that after a spring birth, the mother can hop back into action and help with that summer's harvest. Yeah, maternity leave? Never heard of it, sorry. Welcome to ancient history. It's the worst. Number 5, best man origins. I got asked to be a best man recently, so you know what? I have to share some love. I have to share some ancient best man love. It was a little different back then, that's for sure. Back in those days, the role of the best man normally goes to the guy who's closest to the groom. That's normal, whether that's a brother or a best friend. Back during the time where women were married off like property, the role of the best man was very different, and it was all about protecting one's assets rather than, you know, anything to do with love. Back then, bride kidnapping was so common that if there was somebody else who wanted to marry someone who was already promised to send someone else, they might try and steal her for themselves, right? It's awful. That's where the best man comes in. He's gotta watch for dudes hopping fences ready to steal your wife and run away. The best man's job was to protect the bride at all costs. And if she was stolen, the best man would be the one to enter whatever battle or duel was necessary to get the bride back. The best man was literally there to be the best fighter. That's wild. The best man was also there to watch over the bride to make sure she didn't try and make a run for it as well. It sounds okay at first, and then you're like, oh no, it's all horrible. History, of course. Number 4, ancient divorce. It happens sometimes. Weird. Almost like those marriages I just explained wouldn't work out all the time. Weird. Trial by combat. You've probably heard of this, right? We've all seen that Game of Thrones episode. The eyes and the... Yeah, that's a good one. That was the norm, right? You fight for your freedom. But what about divorce by combat? You ever heard of this? If you and your significant other weren't getting along back in the dark ages, instead of dishing out thousands on couples therapy and signing all that paperwork, instead you would battle each other in front of a crowd because why not? It's the medieval times. It was an organized event that included restrictions for the husband. Now it's pretty hilarious to think back on, but the husband would have to stand in a hole with one hand tied behind his back, while the wife, soon to be happy ex-wife, ran around in circles around said hole, also carrying a sack full of rocks, hitting the ex-husband with the rocks the whole time. Yeah. Pretty intense and also pretty hilarious to think of. Yeah, that's why you don't cheat in the dark ages, Lancelot. Get out of here. A sack of rocks? Just take the castle, take the horse. I don't care, I'm out. I'll sign anything. I'll stamp anything. Number 3, the Battle of the Stray Dog. Okay, now we're gonna go back into some weird battles that we probably missed in school. I grew up with dogs my whole life, okay? It's stressful at times. You open the door for a second and all of a sudden your furry friends are running down the street after a blue jay and your heart's racing. Since the Second Balkan War in the early 1900s, Greece and Bulgaria were going head to head, right? At this point, there was a lot of conflict, a lot of emotions, tensions were of course high. But come October 1925, things finally escalated even more. A Greek soldier was chasing after his dog, who just decided to bolt randomly. But in doing so, he accidentally crossed the border into Bulgaria. So he was shot at, right? It was scary. The Greeks at that point were beyond upset, so they marched into Bulgaria and soon began a full-on war, all because of this dog, who saw a blue jay probably. By the time the International Committee negotiated a ceasefire to clear up the obvious misunderstanding, 50 people had already lost their lives. So yeah, keep those leashes on, please, unless you're in a off-leash dog park, because you might start a war. You never know. Number 2, the Battle of Los Angeles. Of course I have to mention this battle. This one's a little bit different, but you know, maybe some UFO stuff going on here. The Battle of Los Angeles, otherwise known as the Great LA Air Raid, happened during World War II, right at the end of February 1942. This event, first of all, it took place only a few months after the Pearl Harbor attack. So yeah, everybody was of course immensely stressed out at this point. And then something like 25 enemy aircraft was then spotted flying over LA. in the late hours of February 24th. So now everyone's freaking out. Air raids went off, blackouts were in effect. This was not a drill, right? Artillery fire, machine guns, anti-aircraft shells. In total, around 1,400 shells were all fired off. 2 people had heart attacks. 5 people died in total from this retaliation, and it was all a false alarm. Yep. A press conference was held by the Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knox, and he called the incident war nerves. Yeah. Oops. Thought I heard a noise. My bad. We'll just close that. No one touches anymore, I guess. War nerves. And finally, number 1, Battle of Zappolino. This one is pretty epic, okay? All over a bucket. Turning the calendars back to 1325, the Battle of Zappolino, it was a large-scale event all over a tiny bucket. And no, I'm not joking. The War of the Oaken Bucket. Now this war consisted of 2 Italian towns, Bologna and Modena. Now it all kicked off when soldiers from Modena snuck into Bologna with intentions to steal the wooden bucket from the city's well. Right? Resources were sparse back then, of course, so the Bolognese declared war, and then they sent in an invading force of 30,000 foot soldiers and 2,000 cavaliers. The city of Modena had a smaller army. They had 500 infantrymen and only 2,000 cavalry forces. But the thing is, those guys still won. They chased the larger army back to Bologna while destroying towns in the process. Now some recall them bringing the bucket back just to taunt the city, but right now the bucket is currently on display still in Modena, so it ended up finding its forever home there. And you can go check it out if you want. That many people kicked the bucket over this bucket. History is strange, my friend.
In our number 10 spot today, we have lobotomies. Did you know that it used to be common practice for people to just get a part of their brain cut out? Okay, well maybe not common, but it wasn't as uncommon as you would hope. Lobotomies used to be considered an excellent and efficient cure for things such as mental health problems, which thankfully is a practice that has not survived for a very good reason. Of course, in modern medicine, lobotomies still exist, but only when actually necessary, and there is of course a lot more knowledge about the dangers and effects. One well-known person to have undergone one of these procedures was Rosemary Kennedy, who was John F. Kennedy's sister. She was experiencing seizures as well as mood swings, and while these seizures certainly were something that needed to be looked after for her health, I'm not sure if the mood swings necessarily needed some kind of medical intervention. Anyways, to quote-unquote cure her, they had a lobotomy performed on her. This procedure left her with the mental capacity of a 2-year-old, and she could no longer speak or walk properly. After this, she spent most of her life hidden away, and it was thought that her family did this because they were ashamed of her, which is both horrible and so sad. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Posthumous Execution. Okay, so this is something that has actually happened more than once, but I just found out it's happened at all, and I'm both slightly confused and absolutely disgusted at the idea, so I needed to share one example with you guys. So there was a man named Oliver Cromwell, who Wikipedia describes as, quote, an English general and statesman who, first as a subordinate and later as commander-in-chief, led armies of the Parliament of England against King Charles I during the English Civil War, subsequently ruling British Isles as Lord Protector from 1653 until his death in 1658. So, in 1658, Oliver passed away fairly suddenly, and his son Richard became Lord Protector, but because he now had a power base in Parliament or the army, he had to resign just the following year, which effectively ended the Protectorate. Since there was no clear leadership during this time, George Monk was able to have the Long Parliament restored. He then made some slight constitutional adjustments so that Charles II could be invited back from exile in 1660 and actually be a king under a restored monarchy. So then on January 30th, 1661, on what was the 12th anniversary of the execution of King Charles I, Oliver's body was exhumed and executed posthumously. They killed a dead guy. I get that it's like symbolic, but it's just like a little redundant, don't we think? Anyway, his head was cut off and displayed outside of Westminster Hall until 1685. Afterwards, it had a series of different owners, which only adds to the oddity of this story. In our number 8 spot today, we have Agent Orange. Agent Orange is not Cody Banks' cousin, but it was an extremely potent herbicide used from 1961 to 1971 in the Vietnam War. It was intended to cut through the canopy of thick foliage in Vietnam in order to reveal the troops underneath, but instead it proved to be extremely deadly to humans. It caused cancers, birth defects, and so many more different health issues. It's not like it was just a little bit either. 21 million gallons of it were sprayed over Vietnam, which affected hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese citizens, and it also affected the US veterans who faced exposure as well. While this is a dark part of history and it's really difficult to hear about, it's also important that we don't forget things like this. Knowing our history is so important so we don't make the same mistakes again. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Red Summer. The Red Summer is something I didn't even hear mentioned in school, which is honestly absolutely shocking. I'm hoping this is something that is more commonly taught than I think it is, because it really is important. The Red Summer is the term used to refer to the period from the late winter through to the early autumn of 1919, in which white supremacist terrorism and racial riots took place in more than 36 cities across America. Some of the more well-known race riots that took place during the Red Summer were the Chicago, Washington, D.C. riots. These anti-black riots are said to have developed from a multitude of post-World War I tensions, such as the economic slump and the competition in job and housing markets. In 1919, it certainly wasn't uncommon for there to be race riots and a multitude of white-on-black violence, but the Red Summer really marked some of the first race riots in which black people in number stood up to the white supremacy, resisted, and fought back. During the Red Summer, a civil rights activist named A. Philip Randolph publicly defended the right of black people to self-defense. It is said that between January 1st and September 14th of 1919, white mobs at least 43 black Americans, but despite this, the states refused to interfere or prosecute these mobs. Considering how many race riots went on during this summer, we truly could dedicate an entire video to the Red Summer. It is insane to think about how recent 1919 really was, and while we certainly have come a long way, there's always more work to be done, and part of the work involves us learning about these horrible histories and what has happened in our past. In our number 6 spot today, we have King Gojong of Yu. King Gojong of Yu had his reign from 496 BC until 465 BC. His reign took place during what was arguably the last major conflict of the spring and autumn period, and he was able to lead his state to victory, but it certainly wasn't an easy road or without some very creepy happenings. The major conflict he led his state through was the war between Wu and Yu, which started when a Yu princess, who was married to a prince of Wu, left her husband and fled back to Yu. I mean, this of course wasn't the only thing that caused the war, but it certainly sparked the fire. The king was an extremely humble king, as he wouldn't relish in the riches he had as most royals would. Instead, he ate the same food as peasants and often would leave himself hungry in order to remember that he was in a position to serve his state. Okay, so you might be sitting there wondering when I'm gonna get to the scary historical event you came to this video for, so here it is. As I mentioned before, he was able to lead his state to victory, but of course a war involves a lot of sacrifice and some pretty horrific happenings. The king's army was very well known for their ability to scare their enemies before a battle began, and this is because their front line consisted of criminals who had been sentenced to death. In this time, there wasn't lethal injection or the electric chair, so naturally, it was a lot more of a vicious process. These criminals would decapitate themselves in front of the enemy army. Yep, I think this is probably the definition of a scary historical event. I can't even imagine witnessing something like that and then having to proceed with a battle against the army that has people doing that sort of thing. The king was certainly not a leader who wasted any time messing around. In our number 5 spot today, we have the hostage crisis. In 1980, America saw Ronald Reagan win the presidential election over former President Jimmy Carter, but there was a crisis going on that was taking the attention of Americans everywhere. The Iran hostage crisis is well known in American history, and it began on November 4th, 1979, when 52 American diplomats and citizens were held hostage by a group of militarized Iranian college students who took over the US Embassy in Tehran. The 444 days these Americans were held hostage is something I'm sure a lot of Americans learned about at some point or another, but the release of the hostages is what sometimes gets a little murky in the history books. The hostages were released on January 20th, 1981, which was the day that Reagan was inaugurated. There were people who believed that the hostages were released because Reagan was simply just more powerful than Jimmy Carter. Basically what I'm trying to say is that Reagan received a ton of credit for the release of the hostages, but truthfully, it barely had anything to do with him. The Carter administration had been attempting to negotiate with them for months, but they hated Carter because he had provided aid to the former monarch of Iran and had also failed an attempt to rescue the hostages before. So while they certainly were released on Inauguration Day, it had way less to do with Ronald Reagan and more to do with them just absolutely hating Jimmy Carter. In our number 4 spot today, we have the zombie virus. I know The Walking Dead is a popular series, but none of us dream of living in that world. I mean, at least I hope not. What a literal nightmare. That is why in 2017, when the UK discovered that many of their caterpillars were falling victim to what became known as zombie virus, we all said, we've had enough. Especially now that we've all gone through a pandemic. That kind of energy just needs to stay as far away from us as possible. The caterpillars were being infected with baculovirus, which stops their molting and encourages them to continue eating. Once they've eaten a bunch and they're full to the brim, the virus then tells them to head high onto a leaf, which, like, if we weren't talking about a virus that's killing them, that would be like the cutest little sentence, just like high on a little leaf. Anyway, it's not cute and it's sad. Basically, once on their leaf, if a bird doesn't snatch them up, warning, this is kind of gross, their body liquefies and explodes, and then the virus is spread onto the other caterpillars below. Yeah, see, let's all move on and forget it ever happened. The caterpillars are good, everyone's fine. In our number 3 spot today, we have the prohibition poisoning. I'm sure most of us learned about the prohibition at some point in school, which of course was the outlaw of the consumption of alcohol, which was done with a ban being placed on the production, importation, transportation, and sale of alcohol by the US government from 1920 to 1933, but it's just as well known that this ban certainly did not stop people from producing or consuming alcohol. It was just done in sneakier ways. The black market for alcohol was booming as people began to drink redistilled industrial alcohol instead. This is all pretty well known, but one super sketchy thing that is definitely less well known is something that government agencies did to curb the black market sales of alcohol. Basically, they poisoned the industrial alcohol that was being repurposed for drinking, and not just poisoned in a way where the drinker would get sick, which is already horrendous enough, but they poisoned the alcohol with lethal chemicals. It is thought that by the time the prohibition ended, at least 10,000 people died from this. This event is still one of the strangest and deadliest decisions made by government officials. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire. New York City's Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire in 1911 was an unbelievably terrible incident that led to changes being made for factory workers in America. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was located on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors of a building in Greenwich Village, and it of course was where shirtwaists were being made, which we would now call a woman's blouse. I call this place a factory, but it was definitely more like a sweatshop, and the employees were mostly comprised of young women. So, like I mentioned before, in 1911 there was unfortunately a fire that broke out on the 8th floor, and because of the cramped and unsafe working conditions, the fire ended up claiming the lives of 146 people that day, which is just horrible. After more details came out about the incident and how terrible the working conditions were, protests broke out all around the city. People began demanding better for the women who had to work in these kinds of places. Like, just as an example, the doors to the stairwells and exits were locked so that employees couldn't take unauthorized breaks. How unbelievable is that? And the worst part is that the owners of the company, who were largely responsible for what happened that day, basically just got off scot-free. In our number 1 spot today, we have internment camps. This is something that might be more well known than I think it is, but in my Canadian education, it wasn't something we talked about at all, which is kind of shocking. During World War II, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which would cause 117,000 Japanese Americans to have to give up their homes, jobs, and businesses and move to internment camps. This was due to the fear of espionage after Pearl Harbor. This was truly one of the worst violations of civil rights in the 20th century, and the government didn't apologize for it until decades later, but they cited national security as the justification for their actions. Unfortunately, this was only the beginning, as other countries began to follow suit, with Canada, Mexico, Peru, Brazil, Chile, and Argentina all having their own versions of the same kind of atrocity. It is very surprising to me that this isn't something that is discussed more often, as it of course is something that would prove detrimental to the Japanese American community for decades to come.
Number 10. The Adibic box. Okay, we'll start this list off with a DIY. Yeah, here we go. This is why you should never, ever make your own Ouija board. Don't even think about it. In Jewish folklore, Adibic is an evil spirit. A Jewish survivor who made it through all the horrors of World War II and everything. The legend has it that said survivor managed to trap a demon inside of a wine cabinet. Now that on its own is terrifying. So now what? What do you do? What do you do with a locked away demon? Well, that's where Kevin Mannis comes in. Yeah, Kevin bought the box in 2001, and as soon as he bought the box, he had these vivid nightmares. Nightmares of an old witch, and his friends who hung out with him also had the same nightmare. So yeah, not great. Haunted by association. Not great at all. Mannis gave the box to his mother for some reason. He thought this was a better plan than, burying it in a cornfield or throwing it into the ocean. But he passed it along to his mother, and apparently she had a stroke the very next day. Almost like it was indeed haunted. The last owner, Jason Haxton, director of the Museum of Osteopathic Medicine, he sealed the Adibic back in the box and then hid it from the world. Great move. Finally, nice. We love that. That's a smart move. Number 9. Cursed brick. Perhaps one of the least terrifying items on this list, but haunted nonetheless. The brick from the Borley Rectory, aka a brick from one of the most haunted houses in all of England. The house was originally built back in 1862. It was a house built for the rector of Borley, but after a fire in 1939, it was never the same. It was now haunted. But it was finally demolished in 1944. Gone. Good. Poof. Good. Get this thing out of here. But before its final days, the Daily Mirror printed about this house. Harry Price, a paranormal researcher at the time, he reported sightings of a ghost nun or a ghost car driving by that same property, as well as footsteps and unexplained sounds all around it. So yeah, a little piece of this haunted home still sits in the Warren Occult Museum today. The haunted brick from the old haunted Borley. The haunted brick? I don't know. This one's not scary. I wouldn't see this one in Conjuring 4, I bet. I don't think we're gonna see this one. Number 8, Werewolf Paw. Okay, this one we did see in the live action Conjuring universe. In Annabelle Comes Home, we see in the museum a werewolf paw sitting on a shelf. Then later on in the movie, we see a real werewolf outside of the Warrens. Now, this is most likely a nod to a London case involving the Warrens, which happened in real life, where a man was behaving like a werewolf. Yeah, he would just flip and then become one. Not physically, obviously, that would be kind of terrifying, but he would use his fingers like claws and he would growl and he would attack people on the streets of London. Like he would act like a werewolf. This man was William Ramsay, and the Warrens believed that this was the same spirit responsible for transforming humans into wolves back in the day. Yeah, the old classic lycanthropy. We love that. In 1989, the solution was for Ed and Lorraine to bring Bill to the States, where Bishop Robert McKenna performed an exorcism, turning the man back to his regular non-werewolf self. So if you see a paw, still attached, not attached, just don't touch it. I don't know, paws are gross in general. Like a brick versus a paw, Gross. Number 7, Dante and Virgil in Hell. Okay, we're gonna crank it up a little bit. Going back to some artwork, some haunted, spooky art. Here you go. This terrifying work of art was created in 1850 and is currently on display in Paris. This painting is depicting a scene from Dante's Divine Comedy, which is basically about Dante being taken on a journey through hell with Virgil showing him the way. The painting shows a certain scene where Dante and Virgil are witnessing damned souls intertwining in eternal combat. You can only imagine what that looks like, or smells like. Probably not a good one. One of the souls was believed to be a heretic, which is now, how we landed into the Underworld. And the other soul we see in the picture, who's, biting his neck, was thought to be a man who falsely claimed another man's inheritance, which certainly is not a good thing to do if that happens in real life. Consult a lawyer, maybe, don't be biting anyone's neck. There's some obvious possessions in this picture. The painting also features some sort of terrifying creature flying in the background. That's always fun, just a cameo, a nice dragon cameo, as well as a lot more damned souls fighting in the fiery pits. Yeah, these pits are often full of souls. Full o' souls. This whole painting is just a stunning piece of art as well as an absolute nightmare, so yeah, art. It's nice and balanced, as all things should be. Number 6, the Nightmare painting. Another one, just while we're on the arts vibe, the artsy vibe. The Nightmare was created in 1781, and there's a lot going on in this one here. The painting shows a woman who is fast asleep with her arms thrown out below her, which is all fine and well and dandy, but there's also some sort of demon, incubus thing sitting on her chest. It's always something, right? You always gotta mess up this nice image, this beautiful, lovely image, which is, a weird thing to look at. The painting is said to display a woman dreaming and also the nightmare she is having at the same time, which is, that's art, it's fun, that's an eerie description. There are red velvet curtains hanging in the background with creepy horse heads poking out of them, which is also said to, help them into the nightmare vibe. The colors represent so much of what's going on in this painting, with the sleeping woman being brightly colored and shown and the rest of the painting being much darker in contrast. It's kind of haunting to look at, honestly. Makes you feel weird looking at it, but you know what? That's art. Number 5. Cursed goat. Yeah, a cursed animal, let's do it. The curse of the billy goat. Can an entire team be cursed? It seems so. I mean, I live in Toronto, home of the Maple Leafs, so, you know, seems pretty cursed in this area. We haven't seen a win in, I don't know, 96 decades. But the Chicago Cubs curse, that was a huge deal for a long time. The Chicago Cubs curse comes from 1945, when a man named Bill Sionis, nicknamed Billy Goat, he was kicked out of a Chicago Cubs game. Why, you ask? Well, he didn't even get into game 4 to begin with because, well, was he too intoxicated? Or did he bring a live goat with him to the game? Maybe a bit of both, who knows? Yeah, Bill brought with him his pet goat for good luck. So after the staff said no, you can't, enter the 1945 World Series with a live goat, of course not, he then cursed the club over and over on the way out, saying the Cubs are never gonna win another game. And that was the game they dropped the ball, figuratively and literally. The Detroit Tigers won and the curse of the Billy Goat kicked off. It got so out of hand that come 1994, great year, the Cubs had lost 12 games in a row, their worst home start in history. So Sam Sionis went to Wrigley Field, he went back, and everybody was chanting to now let the goat in. And then the Cubs won 5-2, so I don't know. Humans in the 1700s were like, yeah, that woman's cursed, let's just, hang her. And then this is like, he's not cursed, let's bring him into the Wrigley's sports field, let's do it. Oh, how times have changed. Insane. Number 4. The Dark Mirror. Wasn't this the second Thor movie that nobody liked? The Dark Mirror is part of a fun little collection, the world's only mobile museum of the unexplained. Nice. Get your haunts on the go-go. This mirror supposedly doesn't shine bright like a diamond, but instead this dark mirror has a life of its own. The museum obtained it from the original owner who purchased it at a psychic fair in the Columbus area. Pretty solid place to get something like that, so yeah, it checks out. That same owner said the mirror reflected horrifying visions when gazing into it. Now, according to the museum, visitors also claim to have reported uncomfortable sightings, such as their own corpse when gazing into the reflective glass. Yeah, no spoilers, mirror. I'm only on season 27 of my life. I don't want to see how it's going to happen. I had a crazy dude downtown tell me which day I was going to die in grade 11 on a field trip. He was like, in 7 years, you will die. I'm like, okay. I was scared for 7 years. Was that a curse? I think that was a curse. Number 3, the Busby stoop chair. Yeah, we gotta include a haunted chair, whatever. We threw in a brick, some pieces of art. Why not? Let's throw in a Busby stoop chair. This chair comes from 1702, 10 years after the Salem witch trials, so take this one with a grain of salt. People made odd choices back then. Women were witches and chairs were evil. Welcome to 1702. Hit that thumbs up. Englishman Thomas Busby had some issues with his father-in-law and he didn't handle them too well, so now he has to be hanged for it. Yeah, you can't just kill people for no reason, Thomas. What is this, 1692? Idiot, read a book. He was hanged near the Humble Inn, pretty ironic, but a chair that was nearby is now said to hold that spirit of one Thomas Busby. Yeah, if you stood on this chair, you were set to die in a frightful accident. If you stood on this chair, you were set to die in a frightful accident. Nice, a nice frightful accident. You can only imagine. The horrors. You're actually at a haunted desk in this office. That's actually where I'm sitting. Kyle, you're at the haunted desk. I don't want to tell you that. So the chair was declared haunted, but did anything actually happen here? Honestly, yeah. Locals said during World War II, airmen from a nearby base came to the pub, and those who sat on it never returned. I mean, may have had something to do with the war, but sure, like I said, grain of salt. But then in the 70s, more accidents were connected, but they still kept it around until 1978 for some reason, yeah. It stayed in the inn for that long, until it was donated to the Thirsk Museum. It's not even a rocking chair either, it looks like an uncomfortable chair. Why people would sit on this in the first place, I don't know. Number 2, the Underworld. I'm not necessarily sure if I have to explain this one and how it's haunted, because the name kinda carries it for itself. This painting by Hans Memling was created in 1485, and it's, as its name hints towards, a little bit terrifying. This is one of 3 double-sided panels that were created, and it features a banner that reads, "There is no redemption in hell." Nice. I always wondered, now we know for sure, thanks. 1485 education. The painting features some sort of demon creature with fangs and bat-like wings, real comforting to see at 2 a.m. And then it features another entire face on its belly, which I've never seen before. That's very artistic, I love that. Its hands and feet are claw-like and it's depicted stepping or dancing on the backs of people who are in the mouth of some sort of beast. Of course, also engulfed in flames the entire time. Obviously. This whole painting is absolutely terrifying to look at, especially for those who believe in the existence of hell. It would be extremely interesting to know exactly where these inspirations for this piece came from. Is it from a believer, a non-believer? I'm curious, how do you think of something and then go, oh, nice. And then for 46 years, work on this haunting image. You know what I mean? Number 1, broken mirror history. Okay, we gotta talk about why this happens. It doesn't matter who you are, you've heard of this one before. You break a mirror, what do you get? You get a broom first, obviously, then you get 7 years of bad luck. Has this ever happened to you? If so, what year are you on? I'm on year 5, and 3, and 7. I'm clumsy, I don't know. Ancient Romans believed that the human soul would renew every 7 years. That's where the whole 7-year thing comes into place when we do this. It takes time to repair the human soul, apparently. That combined with the belief that a mirror's reflection was the only way into the soul, well, now we have one guy historically who feels really bad for breaking a mirror. Therefore, we have a curse that lives on. And we still talk about it today. If you break a mirror, you're tearing the soul from the body and you're abandoning it. That's what you're doing. Yeah, you're not messing up your living room, you're abandoning your own soul. Tell your dad that next time you drop something. In Kazakhstan, if you break a mirror, evil spirits will haunt the person responsible for said damage. Nice, that checks out, that makes sense. They say you can't look into the broken mirror pieces afterwards because that is also bad luck as well. So if you break a mirror, you gotta just kind of do nothing about it. I don't know. Just gotta kind of sweep without looking at it. You're like, I think I got them all. I don't know. Just watch your feet. Wear flip-flops for a week. I can't look down. There's too many mirrors now, honestly. Everywhere I go, it's just reflections. There's like mirrors in the back of people's phones. Ancient Romans had no idea what 2022 would look like. Do phones count? If so, I'm Number 10, the first marathon. Now, the term marathon, right off the bat, it comes from ancient Greek history. The Battle of Marathon, I've certainly mentioned on this channel a few times. But let's look further a few hundred years, give or take. The first ever Olympics marathon. It was an absolute shit show. 7 miles from the finish line, one guy started ingesting strychnine and egg whites just so we could finish the race. So yeah, that was the first ever modern use of narcotics in an official Olympic game sport. One dude was also running the marathon in dress shoes and dress pants. Just a classy lad with 58 blisters, just booking for hours at a time. William Garcia, one of the 32 competitors, straight up almost died during this marathon. He collapsed mid-race. He barely made a recovery. Have you done a marathon before? If so, tell me your experience down below. I did the Toronto Marathon a month ago and I got 35 kilometers out of 42. It was so close it hurt my soul. If only I wasn't wearing those dress shoes, you know, maybe I would have finished. So close. Number 9, Unsinkable Sam. In our last video, I asked who likes dogs and who likes cats and yada yada yada. This one here, I'll give to the cat people. You get one. Cats have 9 lives. I'm a firm believer in this theory now. Unsinkable Sam was the nickname for a cat who survived several shipwrecks during World War II. His tale began aboard a German warship called the Bismarck. Yeah, also imagine that image right there. 2,200 soldiers just standing in a line, and then also this black and white cat that somehow snuck aboard. Nobody knows how it got on, but I'm pretty sure one guy does. He's like, the Bismarck was decimated during one of the attacks, of course, and while the HMS Kozak was looking for survivors shortly after, they saw Oscar the cat on a plank. Yeah, he had to earn the Unsinkable Sam alias, alright? You get a new life, you get a new name, then it happens. The HMS Kozak hauled him aboard, but then several months later, the Kozak was destroyed. Now this time it was the HMS Ark Royal who spotted the cat, and then the fearless feline was dubbed Unsinkable Sam. Little man passed away in 1955, not on a warship, so that's great. I hope there's therapy in cat heaven. My god. He's like, well, 4 out of the 9 sucked. I don't know. Number 8, Robert Liston. In the early 19th century, crowds would gather to watch Dr. Robert Liston work, okay? They would huddle around like it was a dance battle. They get nice and close and breathe in each other's mouths. He was known as the fastest knife surgeon in the West. I know, how many red flags can you find already? A crowd, a fast surgery, this guy just in the middle of it. What's going on? Like, please help me, please put me together. I don't know. This was a time before anesthesia had been developed, so you wanted things wrapped up quick. Pun intended. Now, Robert, he would have you amputated and sutured in 3 minutes flat, right? Don't you want that? Don't you want a nice fast surgery? Mortality rate was 300%. Not great at all, in fact. And then one fateful day, Robert attempted to beat any record previously held. He was trying to perform the fastest surgery, but during so, he accidentally cut off his assistant's fingers as well as the patient's leg. So, I don't know what the guy's doing with his arms, but you're like, buddy, slow down. We got more than 3 minutes, it seems. He also hit somebody else watching by accident, you know what I mean? Remember how I said crowds would gather, the old surgery crowd? This is why you don't stand too close, okay? It's like crump battles. You get too close, you're getting nicked by something. Either Robert or some guy in Tim's. Both are gonna hurt. I'm glad surgeons are taking their time now. I'm also glad no surgeons are trying new experiments at a record time. That's also nice. Can you take your time, please? Number 7, the first open heart surgery. Moving on to some other surgeons a little better, hopefully. We've discussed ancient Egyptians and how they would clean the entire body out for the whole mummification process and then put the heart back in. Now, of course, they weren't alive during any of this, but when was the first open heart surgery? When did that happen? What did that room look like? The first successful open heart surgery went down in Chicago in 1893. It was honestly unbelievable. The patient was a man named James Cornish. He got a knife wound to the chest during a brawl. It was probably Robert Liston just doing his thing. Maybe he got too close, I don't know. And the surgeon, Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, who by the way used to be a shoemaker's assistant, he saved this man's life and he also made history. In the city's first interracial hospital too, might I add. So a lot of firsts happening in this one. Now there weren't any textbooks on this type of operation at the time, so the odds of survival of course were extremely low. In fact, there weren't any odds at all. Right? No x-rays, no antibiotics, no anesthesia, no problem, right? Using just a scalpel, Dr. Williams cut through his chest, weaved through all the nerves slowly, might I add, thankfully. He weaved through muscles, ribs, everything until eventually he closed a severed artery right near the heart. Cornish survived, thankfully, and come 1894, Williams was promoted to chief surgeon at the Freedmen's Hospital in Washington, D.C. Imagine he went back to being a shoemaker's assistant. He's like, all right, cool. Now I want those shoes. Number 6, the Pfizer Fine. When we think of the name Pfizer now, there's obviously mixed feelings, pun intended. But back in 2009, before they were making cures, they were paying some hefty fines. The world's largest pharmaceutical company had to pay a record-breaking fine. They had to pay $2.3 billion in criminal and civil penalties over unlawful prescription drug promotions. Now included in this mighty slap on the wrist was a $1.2 billion criminal fee. Now if that didn't sound bad enough, in the agreement was also a criminal forfeiture of $105 million. So you're paying and you're also getting more stuff taken away. It's all bad. This was the 4th time Pfizer got charged with this magnitude in a decade. They were on a pretty bad streak. What got them in hot water in the first place is that they would promote their products at resorts, right? They would invite doctors to these meetings, give them golf, massages, whatever. They would pepper you up nice so that you were Team Pfizer by the end of the trip. And you were all tanned. You looked nice, right? FBI Assistant Director Kevin Perkins says the corporate giant was blatantly violating the law and misleading the public through false marketing claims. Number 5, no birds at the funeral. If you ever want to liven up a funeral, try bringing a parrot. They love to heckle, turns out. Former President Andrew Jackson, he passed away a long time ago. He passed away in 1845. Now, it's important to note that he passed away before his pet did. He passed away before his pet parrot died. So the parrot, of course, attended the funeral, right? How lovely, right? I bet after I said that, you said, oh, maybe you gave it a thumbs up, maybe you subscribed. Good stuff going around, right? It's lovely. Thing is, the parrot loved to swear. Yeah, he had a few curse words in his back pocket. This parrot actually heckled so much during the funeral that they had to remove it. How epic is that? Got kicked out like it was a comedy club. They're like, all right, put your wings behind your little bird neck, we're out of here. Number 4, illegal pedestrian crossing. I see this far too often living in the city. Toronto is wild for this. It drives me crazy. People jaywalking. Looks like there's not a truck coming your way. They do that little wave, a little smile, a little weird walk, and they just go wherever they want. Middle of a Toronto intersection, they're like, hey, I'm 92, see ya. Everyone's slamming their brakes, avoiding them all of a sudden. You're holding up traffic even more. Now, in China, jaywalking, that's a no-go. Article 40 of Beijing's traffic law stipulates that drivers and motor vehicles cannot suddenly stop even if it's at a crosswalk. So yeah, you can't even stop when you're at a crosswalk. You have to wait for cars. So if you're not in a car, you have to wait. You don't get the right of way automatically, like, you know, most of the time. And for drivers, it's forbidden to stop at these crossings. You gotta just keep going. If you do, you're getting a fine. Hopefully just a warning, but possibly a fine for stopping at a crosswalk. How insane is that? Number 3, raining coffee. The sky is falling. Sometimes it's frozen lizards and sometimes it's bugs. But you know what? Sometimes maybe coffee will fall from the sky. I don't know. Get your mugs ready. We're waking up early tomorrow. I don't know. Back in 1969, a South Carolina factory was busy. The non-dairy creamer, Cremora, was doing great production-wise, but they didn't have the greatest air vents in the factory. All of a sudden, the powder mixture leaked out one day, went into the air, where it then mixed with falling rain, and voila. Now we have double doubles falling from the clouds. Now we have a really odd rainfall. Chester, South Carolina. It was the day we woke up to coffee goop on our lawns instead of dew. That's memorable for sure. The company ended up paying a fine of $4,000 for allowing their product to be released from the plant. Could have been worse. Could have been a lot worse. Could have been a spider factory. I don't know. First thing I can think of. Number 2, they can't stop all of us. Remember that Area 51 raid that went down back in 2019? Months of planning, gathering heads, planning trips, renting cars, all to get everyone out to Nevada. Everyone was determined to find out the truth about aliens. It was a big raid where everyone planned to overthrow every Area 51 guard. So, did it work? What ended up happening there? I forget.
Everyone! We're not here for photos! We're here to rescue the aliens!
Yeah, okay, it didn't work. Turns out a handful of gamers can't overthrow a government military base. Who knew? Shoot, maybe next time, I don't know. So what was the goal here? 1.5 million people signed up to storm Area 51 in 2019, but this wasn't the first time something like this happened. Back in the 1950s, the public also wanted answers. It was June 17th, 1959, and the Rizzo Evening Gazette published a story with the headline reading, "More flying objects seen in Clark sky." That's pretty alarming. Then the paper went on to describe how Sergeant Wayne Anderson, a local sheriff, was one of many who spotted what the paper described as an object bright green in color and descending towards the earth at a speed too great to be an airplane. Yeah, I just watched Jordan Peele's A Note. Couldn't have done this list at a better time if you ask me. What did they see? It was green, it was close, was it Optimus Prime just coming to say what's up? I need answers, folks. And finally, number 1, Tombstones Ashore. Here we go, death is calling. Back in 2012, the world thankfully did not end, but if you believed that it was going to, this definitely would have freaked you out. Back in May 2012, 2 friends were on a nice beach walk right on the coast of San Francisco's Ocean Beach. Now, when all of a sudden, something that looked like a fridge started to crash through the waves and then onto the shore. Now, it turns out it was not a fridge. That would have been lovely. It would have been a nice surprise. Just some fridge goods popping out from 1976. It turns out it was a massive tombstone from the year 1876. It was a little more haunting than a fridge. The tomb originally belonged to Emma Bosworth, and then just 1 month later, another stone was found, this time with a different name. Of course, that'd be weird if it was the same name again. And then another one, and then another one. So what's going on here? The next tombstone belonged to Delia Presby Oliver from 1890. But the condition that they were in also, these tombstones, they looked brand new. You probably expect as I'm describing this that they're all old and broken apart. Nope. They're all pristine, even more haunting, almost. I don't know. These tombstones came from the Laurel Hill Cemetery after it had shut its gates in 1940, so the headstones were then used as a makeshift seawall. If you ask me, that's a little rude. Your uncle's tombstone just covered in barnacles like he's Davy Jones? No thanks. Pop that out, put that back, draw that out.
Number 10. Chateau de Monsel, a petite fortress in southern France, sitting atop a 170-meter drive uphill. Its ruins a safe house for once the Cathars. Its nickname? Satan's Synagogue. Described as one of the first Cathar castles and has been listed as a monument historique by the French Ministry of Culture. Cathar from the Greek meaning pure. These people were devout. The stronghold fell after a bloody 10-month siege in 1244 by King Louis IX. The field below is known to have been where over 200 men and women were burned alive for having refused to renounce their faith. On that day, the apparent bonfire that happened sparked a curse from the Cathars. Legends of these ruins say any person who strays off the marked footpaths and loses their footing will drop off every side of the so-called, quote, citadel in the sky. Sounds more like a metaphor to me than a curse, but Number 9. Guri Amir. Guri Amir is a mausoleum of the Turco-Mongol conqueror Timur in Uzbekistan, an important place in history of Central Asia. The mausoleum has been heavily restored since, but other than tourists and selfies, the people who intend to learn more of its rich history tend to respect its space. Local residents tried to stop the excavations, but the expedition continued. The tomb was opened by Soviet archaeologists in 1941 and was aimed to examine the human remains and family that belonged to Timur himself. On June 20th, the tomb was opened and the air filled with sharp, choking odors of resins, camphor, and frankincense. At first they thought the smell was the sign of a curse. Then they read Timur's tomb. Yeah, a curse. 2 inscribed warnings that read, "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble. Whosoever disturbs my tomb will unleash an invader more terrible than I." Yeah, sounds right. Number 8. Kalaupapa. In 1866, during the reign of Kamehameha V, Hawaiian legislature passed a law designing this island the official site for patients affected by leprosy, aka Hansen's disease. About 1,200 families were exiled to quarantine here. At the time, the disease wasn't really understood, believing it to be highly contagious and very incurable. Whisked off and locked away amid paradise in total isolation. No amenities, buildings, or even potable water sources. Known by historians who visit as, quote, the pit of hell itself. And apparently the most cursed place on earth. With its grim history of loneliness, despair, and death, it's not surprising at all that Kalaupapa is also said to be haunted. Yeah, I mean, like, this island was basically a death sentence for those on it. Shackles, cages, caves. Sounds about right to be haunted by the afterlife, doesn't it? Number 7. Beit She'arim. The House of Gates, or Beit She'arim, Israel, is popular for its necropolis, known as Beit She'arim National Park. It's partially an excavated archaeological site consisting of a necropolis of rock-cut tombs. Declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2015, this thing is old. Only a portion has been excavated. A stone book, catacombs, mausoleums, and sarcophagi have all been found riddled in elaborate chiseled and painted symbols and inscriptions in Hebrew and in Greek. It's the most ancient, extensive Jewish cemetery in the world. And of course, haunted and cursed. I mean, why wouldn't it be, right? A hex designed to deter grave robbers is scrawled into the limestone slabs in uneven Greek writing, blood red in paint. It reads, quote, Jacob the proselyte vows to curse anybody who would open this grave. So nobody open it. Number 6. Anjukuni Village. Way up north, a village named after a bountiful, massive freshwater lake in Canada. Nunavut, 1932. A Canadian fur trapper went to the village of Anjukuni Lake. Known for their markets of elaborate fish and extensive winemaking, this village was a staple for most on the map. He arrived and sensed something a little odd. Too quiet and too foggy. He found it to be completely empty and deserted, even though there were signs of life still present. Campfires blazing, pots still boiling, doors were even open and food out waiting to be served, but no people. Thousands of Anjukuni villagers had simply vanished. To this date, there's no proper explanation for this mass disappearance of the people, and the weirdest part, all of the graves in the village cemetery were emptied as well. Even the skeletons from the ground were dug up. Nothing left but a pack of frozen sled dogs. RCMP thinks it was blue lights in the sky. I'm just saying, I didn't say it, they said it, not me. Number 5. The City of Screams. Ah yes, Sha'ar-e Golgola, the City of Screams, top of my trip list. Peaceful once as it was the capital of the Gorid people, until Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire seized it in about the 12th century. Apparently legend goes its ruler, Jalaluddin, fought back and killed Khan's son. Yeah, that's probably not a good idea. At first the city held strong but was sold out by the ruler's daughter who, according to legend, betrayed the castle's secret entrance, sharing and consorting with the enemy. Expecting to be rewarded, of course, her and her people were slaughtered, and the ruins cursed. Russians, Taliban, and Americans have all used these ruins as fighting posts over the years, as this place hasn't even been lived in since. Haunted by its legend of those who still hear the screams of the slain, sighting dark horseback figures and even uniformed specters are seen atop the rubble. Yeah, I'd say we just leave this place alone completely. Just kind of back away slowly in respect, you know? Number 4. Skeleton Lake. Deep within the Himalayas of India lay the bay of an ancient lake, shrouded in an ancient mystery. Rupkund Lake, aka Skeleton Lake, was rediscovered by British forest rangers in around 1942. What they found was jarring. Hundreds of ancient human skeletons found at the edge of the lake. Investigations led some to think that it was a catastrophe of some sort. Nope, just 3 different groups of people died here at different times. But why? Wooden artifacts, iron spearheads, even slippers and jewelry were found by the National Geographic team who studied 30 skeletons in 2003. Skin still on some of them. 300 people have been found so far. Legend goes, Parvati, a supreme goddess, cursed the kingdom, unleashing drought and disaster upon them. She sent down a blizzard of hail and whirlwind which swept the people into the lake. I'm saying my prayers tonight, yo. I don't want to get like Jack Skellington out of nowhere. That sounds horrifying. Number 3. Karun Treasure. If we've learned anything about the famous Howard Carter curse with the excavation in Egypt, we see where this is already going, don't we? The people in Yusek, Turkey believe that the treasure found here is cursed. Karun Treasure is the name given to the collection of 363 valuable Lydian artifacts from the 7th century BC. Also called the Croesus Treasure. The treasure included gold and silver, rare Lydian coins, silver vessels, jewelry, even carved marble sphinxes. The discovery in 1966 made those afraid of it may bring upon an ancient curse. Little dynamite and voila, open sesame. 7 men and related violent deaths or great misfortunes. We've learned nothing, haven't we? The treasure was inside the burial chamber of an unknown princess. Yeah, that sounds about right. What do you think? Should we be just mucking around with ancient sites and buried treasure? I'm saying leave it alone, dude. There's a lot of this stuff out there, you know? Number 2. Mainz. Mainz was founded by the Romans in the 1st century BC as a military fortress. Mainz became an important city in the 8th century AD as part of the Holy Roman Empire, and later famous as the birthplace of Johannes Gutenberg, the inventor of the modern printing press. Mainz and its connected Jewish cemetery are both UNESCO World Heritage Sites, because what they found there is pretty eerie. Tons of cursed tablets. The Roman temple of Magna Mater and Isis in Mainz has people puzzled. Thousands of cursed tablets, strips of lead inscribed with requests for divine intervention, then thrown into fiery pits at said temple. In the sanctuary, the mother goddess, Magna Mater, was worshipped according to the inscriptions. The cult of Isis originates from Egypt, while the Mater Magna is a Greek adoption of the goddess. Both cults a long tradition in the Roman Empire. The Isis cult, established under Caligula with military brick stamps found on site, means this place was built on behalf of the emperor for lots of cult practice. And number 1, Mount Ebel. Mount Ebel is one of the 2 mountains in the West Bank territories of Palestine, next to Mount Gerizim. In advance of the Israelites' entry to the Promised Land, Deuteronomy 11:29 records Moses saying, quote, "When the Lord, your God, has brought you into the land which you go to possess, you shall put the blessing on Mount Gerizim and the curse on Mount Ebal." In Deuteronomy 27, an instruction is given to build an altar on Mount Ebal. When done, split into 2 groups, one on Mount Ebal to pronounce curses, and one on Mount Gerizim to pronounce blessings. Well, discovered in 2019, a teeny tiny tablet was found dating to the Bronze Age. Scott Stripling, Pieter van der Veen, and Professor Galil claim to have found the earliest written examples of God's name as Yahweh. It says, quote, "Cursed, cursed, cursed, cursed by the God Yahweh. You will die cursed. Cursed you will surely die. Cursed, 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 cursed." Alright, we get it.
Eating with the rich starts off the countdown at number 10. Medieval recipes depict a large variety of animals being served. Adding to the ones I listed previously are horses, lampreys, cranes, and crows. Hell, even beavers. And let's not forget the animals created by their chefs. One homemade animal was called a cockentrice, and it was actually multiple animals' bodies put together before being roasted. A helmeted cock was another chef creation. It was a roasted chicken wearing a tiny helmet that was sat on the back of a roasted pig, because why not? Dinner in a show is always fun, so in late medieval Europe, it became fashionable to have an entremetta, which was an entertainment dish. One such example is bakers cooked a pie shell in advance, and then after it cooled, they placed live birds inside the pie and resealed it. When cut at the table, the birds would then all fly out of the pie, much to the amazement of the many banquet guests, assuming that all went accordingly. FIFA fans may want to skip out on this next one, because number 9 in our countdown is making football illegal. That's right, while I may be referring to it as primarily soccer in this video, what was still called football at the time was made illegal in the medieval ages. Now there are quite a few reasons for this. Most popularly known is that the sport was extremely different then. It was violent and aggressive, resembling more of a mass brawl with minimal rules. However, it was also because only 2 years after soccer was banned in 1363, King Edward III would implement a mandatory archery education law. This would ensure his villagers could be used as soldiers should need be. King Edward believed that soccer, but also sports in general such as handball, football, hockey, and cockfighting were distractions, and at that time they could be doing better things. I'm sure there are many of you that would disagree. Next on the countdown is number 8, the future predicting Friar. There's a lot to unpack here, so I'll just jump right in. English Franciscan monk Roger Bacon is known through history for his shockingly accurate predictions of the future transportation and life that we have now. Bacon lived from 1214 until 1292 and was the successful creator of the magnifying glass, but he also famously predicted future machinery in his book Espetola de Secretis Operibus, if I got that right. Cars can be made so that without animals, people will move unbelievably rapid, and flying machines can be constructed so that a man sits in the midst of a machine, revolving some engines by which artificial wings are made to beat in the air like a flying bird. It's a little nonsensical, but you can see what he's implying. His other predictions included steamships, submarines, diving suits, and telescopes. That's pretty spot on for a guy who lived thousands of years ago. This is the same man who was also said to have sculpted a prophetic head of brass. Apparently, having been warned by a spirit that he must listen to whenever the head first spoke, Bacon set his assistant Miles to watch over the sculpture, which he did even past Bacon's demise. It's said that after the friar's death, however, that was the first time it spoke. First saying, "Time is," then time passed. Ignored both times by a confused Mile, the head spoke only once more to say time is past before it exploded into flames, and so the chance to consult the mysterious head was lost when it combust. What do you think of the legendary Bacon and his stories of mysticism? Time is past, as the sculpted head said, so let's be happy we left this weird tradition in the past. In at number 7 in the countdown, it's the medieval animal trials. Under the ruler's power, there was no exception to medieval law, and so it should come as no surprise that even animals could face the brunt of their alleged crimes. This was no casual affair. The rich and the poor gathered for these trials as spectators. Some of the accused animals were even dressed in wigs and gloves, fancy garments to be seen in front of the royal court as their fate was debated by the lawmakers. That should come as no surprise either, seeing as the medieval era wasn't exactly overflowing with entertainment outlets. There are records of at least 85 animal trials that had taken place during medieval/Middle Ages. And while the most serious offenders were pigs by a landslide, there are records of some roosters and even one donkey facing the judge. What were these animals being charged for, you may be asking? Many times it was the act of attacking or eating humans, as food and grain for animals was so sparse they'd often go hungry. There were also some accused of being heathens or thieves or behaving in lustuous ways. So make sure you have a walking buddy and always look over your shoulder, because I guess you never know when an ill-intentioned cow may be creeping up on you. Number 6 in the countdown is the St. Galaska Day Riot. February 10th of 1355, a group of students who attended Oxford University decide to go into town for a pint at the Swindlestock Tavern. Little did they or anyone else know that this would be the start of a notoriously famous riot. It started with belligerent complaints to the tavern owner about the quality of their drinks and service. As the tavern owner was progressively more berated, he and other patrons lost their temper with these students. The escalation led to a verbal sparring between the students and bar patrons. Both sides ended up arming themselves, but luckily things were quickly interrupted when the mayor stepped in and demanded the arrest of the students who had harassed and assaulted the tavern owner, thus sparking this whole disaster. What should have been a peaceful resolution caused a chain reaction, however. Oxford students rose up in protest of their peers' arrest and swarmed to attack the mayor. News of that quickly spread, and the townsfolk revolted immediately. Many of them were already very tired of these students and their entitled complex, and had been waiting for the opportunity to rage against them. The riot that occurred ended the lives of 63 students and 30 locals. While the case's investigation led to Oxford winning against the town in court, the Oxford Council was still made to parade shamefully through the village every year on February 10th, and they did have to pay a fine to the families of each student lost. For number 5, we're getting a little spicy with risqué men's clothing. Now, you may have already heard stories or seen memes about ridiculously long pointed shoes and groin-flattering armor, but did you know that provocative men's clothing was all the rage for a period of time in the medieval era? It's recorded that in the late 14th century, men were quite keen to be seen in overtly short tunics and thin tights. By 1463, a modesty statute had to be passed, as men had upgraded to wearing codpieces publicly, which did cover their mostly exposed genitals, but only by making them look cartoonishly large and bulbous in the process. A similar escapade happened with the Krakow shoe. These long, pointy-ended shoes were sometimes so long that they had to be tied back around the wearer's ankles or reinforced inside with a whalebone. The same statute in 1463 also addressed limiting these Krakow shoes for those reasons. Seems like there may be a little bit of a compensation theme here. Both provocative dressing and shoe length were limited to those of extreme wealth after the statute passed. past, but that didn't stop the development of some more outlandish beauty standards. For example, number 4 in our countdown is plucked bear. Nowadays, whether you're scrolling through an app or walking down the road, you're likely to see advertisements for eyelashes and hair accentuation services. And while that may be pretty trendy and normal to us, now, in the medieval ages, having hair on your face would have actually made you stand out in a crowd. Women would remove their eyebrows, eyelashes, even significantly reduce their hairline so as to achieve a smooth egg-like effect. This was because the forehead was considered the center point of the face for many years, and so it would make sense to remove anything on or around it so as to accentuate it, right? Maybe. Moving on. If you're tired of her plucking herself bald, and she's tired of you wearing shoes that enter a room before you do, then maybe it's time for a good old-fashioned medieval divorce by combat. That's right, you heard me. Coming in at number 3 is divorce by combat. This finding was discovered in a historic German manuscript that laid out rules as to how divorce by combat was to proceed. Their decision to use combat as a means to solution was not unusual for medieval Germany, as trial by combat was part of their law system. Trial by combat was legally sanctioned duel that ensured whomever was to win the fight was deemed right. There are many ways that these duels could be fought, and various weapons and locations in which to have them. The divorce by combat trial was placed when a man was put into a 3-foot deep hole with one hand tied behind his back. The woman, however, would have a normal ground and be able to move freely. This was believed to ensure a fair fight between the sexes. Now, there is some evidence that the outcome of these trials could still end in death, even if the death was not as a result of the combat. It's said that if the man lost to his wife, he would be taken from his hole and executed in the town square. If the woman lost, she would be then placed in the hole and then buried alive. So yeah, I'd say maybe try talking it out a little bit first before resorting to a public throwdown that can end in death. And while we're on the topic of trials, number 2 on the countdown is trials of the dead. Who would have such a vendetta with the dead that they would have them unburied to stand a trial? Well, new Pope Stephen, that's who. In 897, the months-old body of Pope Phomorphius, the first pope to ever be executed, was extracted from his grave to serve trial for his alleged usurping of papacy. The new pope donned the corpse in elaborate robes and even assigned a deacon for defense. You may be wondering why the new Pope Stephen had done this to his predecessor. Since a holy person's body was considered to become a holy relic in death, it became a holy rite to display their corpse in public tombs or churches so petitioners may still visit their former saint to leave tokens or deliver prayer. What better way to ensure that you have devoted attention of the community than a postpartum smear campaign where your opponent can't defend themselves because, well, they're dead. Stephen found the deceased Pope Phomorphius guilty so that he could toss his body into the Tiber River, as nobody can venerate his relic if his body is lost at sea. That's a pretty intense way to usurp the person who had the job before you. Joke's on Stephen, however, as shortly after this trial, he was executed just like his predecessor, making him once again come in second to Phomorphius. Call it karma. With that dose of crazy, we can move on to medieval madness, which ranks at number 1 in our countdown. What was the medieval madness? Well, if you're a fan of rye bread, you may not want to listen in on this. In an era without refrigeration systems as well as poor hygiene, produce was left to natural elements. As a result, mold and bacteria growth was common and would of course migrate into food. Ergot mold is the most well known for its effect on the brain. It caused wild hallucinations and extreme emotional changes as the chemicals in your brain became imbalanced. The consumption of this mold and bacteria has had a variety of exclusively unpleasant side effects, such as vomiting, diarrhea, convulsions, delayed visions, even mania and psychosis. These symptoms make it obvious as to why this could be labeled as a madness. The extreme cases of ergot consumption would of course lead to things such as loss of limb, gangrene, or death. And this connection between molding rye flour and ergot poisoning wouldn't be made until 1670. So for hundreds of years beforehand, commoners saw ergot poisoning to be things like demonic possession. Many theorize and connect the medieval madness to that of the time periods of the witch trials. The trials began in 1691, a year of intensive wet and cold which produces a higher level of ergot. They ended abruptly in 1693, a year said to be sparse on rye grain. If there's less to consume, there's less ability to be poisoned, making it arguable that there could be a connection between the two, especially as a side effect of ergot poisoning could be mistaken as demonic possession as previously mentioned, and that is also seen as a symptom of witchcraft. Still, this may not be the kind of bread you want to chase.
Number 10. The Doomsday Book, 1085. The Doomsday Book was created under William I, also known as William the Conqueror. Like, you're already the first, man. You don't need two names, come on. This guy basically drew up a book to document people's money so that he could tax them. Oh yeah, this is the very first time surveyors went town to town and recorded how much money you would owe for simply just doing you. Men would show up at your house asking how much money you made and document your spending habits. 5 shillings on groceries, huh? Okay. And 5 on that phone plan. Look, tax season's coming up, Arthur. It's not looking good, man. Talk about a bunch of crooks, huh? Imagine owing someone money for just trying to make an honest living. Yeah, thank God that didn't catch on, right guys? Oh, speaking of, I gotta phone H&R Block. Number 9, The Crusades. A 3-part miniseries spanning over 200 years. These bloody and ruthless wars were battled between Muslim and Christians for the proprietorship over sacred sites and the land in the East Mediterranean. A 3-part miniseries spanning over 200 years. These bloody and ruthless wars were battled between Muslim and Christians for proprietorship over sacred sites and land in the East Mediterranean. Wars that resulted in 6 million deaths. The Knights Templar, a brotherhood of highly trained soldiers horseback bashing their way through the East. These guys were the real deal, almost like the Navy SEALs of their time. We've seen these paintings. The elite fighting force with the red cross painted on their chests. I wonder if they had to do a Hell Week. These soldiers were the most trained and savage fighters in all the Christian armies. Richard I leading the 3rd and final crusade, earning him the name Richard the Lionheart. Back then the names were always something so aggressive and scary. It was never like Richard the Clownfish or Henry the Pygmy Goat. No, we need fear. Way more fear. Number 8, the Magna Carta. The year's 1215. We need some laws, people. This document was one of its kind. A document setting out the laws and limitations from the common man to King John himself. A legal system written down so that there are clear do's and don'ts. No free man shall be seized, imprisoned, dispossessed, outlawed, exiled, or ruined in any way, nor in any way proceeded against except by the lawful judgment of his peers, and the law of the land. Did you get all that? Write that down. Except women. They don't have laws. And they can't act in plays. Sometimes people needed to face the music. And even animals. Huh? That's right, animals. Being tried in a court. A lively and popular event trying any law-breaking animal from goats to pigs to even chickens. Ladies and gentlemen of the court, did you, Mr. Feathersworth, peck the floor, yes or no? Objection, Your Honor, leading the witness. My brain can't fathom this, guys. Number 7, the Battle of Bannockburn. This infamous battle between Scotland and England was one of the most important battles of the Middle Ages. The end of the bloody war for independence. Basically, Scotland was like, yeah, we're gonna go over here and roll our R's. The gruesome wooden wars were caused by the English invading Scotland in 1296. A leader slowly rising the ranks, William Wallace, the guardian of the King of Scotland himself, holds off the English forces and is knighted a hero to Scotland. Unfortunately, like every hero back then, he was also hated. He was captured, hanged, drawn, and quartered. Like, why do you have to do all that after he dies? Like, he's dead. Not fun. The battles between Scotland and England ended in 1314 with Robert the Bruce securing Scotland's independence, adding like 45 more dialects to the UK. Freedom! Number 6, the Black Death. Ooh, talk about a curveball. The year's 1348. People are saying things like, don't let the bed bugs bite. Clearly not a very clean and safe time. The Black Death, aka pestilence, aka the Great Mortality, or simply known as the Plague. Single-handedly the worst pandemic ever recorded in history, wiping out somewhere between 70 to 200 million people. Ooh, now I get where bless you comes from. Someone sneezed back then and everyone's dead at 14. This is where we see those doctors in the terrifying bird outfits with the long noses stuffed with garlic and herbs. Excuse me? Yeah, he's not wearing a mask. I'm just trying to watch a cat publicly get skinned. Yeah, 6 feet please. Some doctors prescribed urinating on a person so that the bad smell would drive out the infection. Can you imagine? Just a doctor writing you up a script and go ahead and pee on yourself about 4 to 5 times a day. Take with food. Should be gone early next week. And just let me put my mask back on here before you leave. There you are. The plague started in Europe in October 1347 when 12 ships from the Black Sea docked at the Sicilian port of Messina. Most sailors aboard the ships were already dead, but those who were still alive were covered head to toe in black boils that oozed pus and blood. Ugh. Sometimes the Black Death included fever, chills, vomiting, diarrhea, temporary loss in motor skills, and then, of course, death. Number 5. Joan of Arc. Finally, a woman in the Middle Ages. Who'da thunk? Joan of Arc was considered and still is revered the heroine of France for her role in the Siege of Orleans during France's 100-year war with England. Joan of Arc, a peasant with faith on her side, had believed that God had chosen her to lead France in victory against England and had spoken to her since she was young. At only age 17, she had stolen men's armors, a white horse, and like a Valkyrie riding into battle, she had convinced an entire army that she was appointed by God to win. And then did! That's the most badass thing I've ever heard in my entire life. After such a miraculous victory, her reputation spread among France, and upon her capture and death at 19, the Maid of Orleans herself would forever live on as one of the greatest saints and symbols of the country of France. Number 4. Henry V. Another war? All these people do is kill each other. Does anyone fish? Or golf? No one, huh? Just swords and heads, swords and heads. A history itself. This time, England beats France. King Henry V, Prince Hal himself, leans into his kingly duties, demolishing France in what Shakespeare would delve into years to come. The Battle of Agincourt is one of England's most celebrated victories and was one of the most important triumphs in the 100 Years' War. Then should the warlike Harry, like himself, assume the port of Mars, and at his heels, leashed in like hounds, should famine, sword, and fire crouch for employment. Henry V. Prologue. Good stuff. How come these guys didn't just like rap battle or play soccer or something? Like, an arrow right through the chest is way worse than a red card, just saying. Hey, speaking of soccer. Number 3, mob football. I'm not talking about the mafia. Put 1,000 on Brady, would you? I'm talking about mob football, also known as folk football. It's just like our modern day soccer. Town versus town. Except it has an unlimited amount of players. And there's only 2 rules to the game. Get the inflated pig's bladder over the opposing team's lines on the other side of town, and no murdering. I mean, I guess this is closer to rugby? Yeah, this is literally just rugby. This game was played competitively and eventually outlawed at Oxford University in 1555. Just a guy named Jeeves in a polo. Oh yeah, I play mob football at Oxford. Yeah, I'm also in a frat. This game got so out of hand it was banned numerous times in England. There is great noise in the city caused by hustling over large balls from which many evils may arise which God forbid. We command and forbid on behalf of the king, on pain of imprisonment, such game to be used in the city of the future. Thankfully this game has calmed down over the years and now has become the most popular played and watched game across the world. Go Liverpool! Number 2, the printing press. The printing press is a machine that was designed for the mass printing of text, mostly in form of books and newspapers. With an unknown date of origin, first invented in China, this machine, designed in the 15th century by Johannes Gutenberg, was a revolutionary new form of writing which would only change the direction of history with the mass production of uniform text. Long story short, people didn't have to get the world's worst wrist cramp writing Hamlet over and over again. To be, or not to be, 86 more folios? The alphabetical metal keys would be placed into the device and slammed into the paper, pressing ink upon the parchment. You know there's gotta be some books half written in purple ink because they just ran out of black. Come on, we've all been there. Ink's expensive. Number 1, William Shakespeare. The Bard himself, arguably the most influential writer of the English language. William Shakespeare was born in Stratford, England. One of the easiest ways we can look back into the dialogue and lifestyle used by the people living in the Middle Ages. This playwright documents the world in which he lives from 1564 to 1616. Due to Shakespeare's unbelievable talent for building and fabricating an array of diverse stories and characters via players, modern day is able to see the Middle Ages and the similarities and differences the people were experiencing. His plays are based in the environment that they were written in. He writes about diseases, he writes about monarchy, he writes about women's rights. Okay, so no one actually got turned into a donkey by some fairies in the woods, but some of those wars actually did happen, and some of those kings and queens were really twisted. How this man created so many brilliant works and stories, all part of the mystery. What do you think? Genius? Or did the guy have some help? One man in his time plays many parts.